Good afternoon again. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are very proud to present an overview of Fannie Mae's new temporary guidance for condominium and cooperative developments today. I am Orest Tomaselli. I'll outline a little bit about my role here at CondoTek and introduce Lisa GELOSO in a second to outline her role in the company as well. So I was the former owner of National Condo Advisors. In October of this year, National Condo Advisors was acquired by CondoTek. At National Condo Advisors for 13 years, my team and I provided condominium project approval and compliance to lenders across the country and directly to developers and development groups, as well as HOAs. And we did that for Fannie Mae, FHA, Freddie Mac, VA, and portfolio lending capabilities throughout the industry. In October, when we were acquired, the entire staff at National Condo Advisors came over to CondoTek, and I am acting as the president of project review and partner here now, and extremely happy with the choices because we've now been able to put together the project compliance we've always offered with the technology solutions and document collection for condominium and cooperative developments that CondoTek has provided over the years, and that does so well. So the technological aspect of our firm is very unique because we're able to provide a lot of the information that a lot of the clients on this call utilize on a daily basis for condominium project review and compliance. Joining me today is Lisa GELOSO. Lisa is the Director of Business Development and Product Operations here at CondoTek. And I work with her on a minute-by-minute basis, I like to say. I think we're on the phone 7, 8, 10, 25 times a day. Lisa is very unique. I've worked with her for many years in her roles as handling mortgage operations and credit risk and project underwriting at some of the firms that she has worked with over the years. She has really been able to take our product line and move it to a new level since she joined CondoTek. And we work really closely right now on our new product, the Condo Project Warrant, which we'll outline at the end of this presentation, and also with working directly with our clients to making sure that their documentation on condo and co-op reviews comes in quickly and efficiently. So Lisa, welcome. Let me jump into this a little bit and provide you with an outline a little bit about CondoTek and then going into the presentation. So again, CondoTek is a technology firm. The documentation that's acquired by them is utilized across the industry, and how that relates to this presentation today is important because within our CondoPack product, with which most of the folks on this call are familiar with, we've already implemented new policies and procedures here, which we're going to go over today, based upon Fannie Mae's new guidance. And those new policies and procedures were really intended to ensure, or are really intended to ensure, that the right documentation is obtained, and for a condominium project or cooperative project review, with being very thoughtful to Fannie Mae's guidance on structural integrity, infrastructure, deferred maintenance, new unavailable status requirements, and what's required now for the PERS project approval reviews. So that being said, let's look at the lender letter. So this presentation, it's important for you to note that this presentation will be available on our blog, and the links will be active on our blog, so you'll be able to actually link through to those guidelines, although I know many of you have already seen them. In addition to that, it's important to note that you can ask any question you like within the chat box here. We're going to do our best to get to as many questions as we can at the end. Hopefully we do a good enough job to limit the questions based upon the information we're going to provide. But yeah, we're happy to answer anything. If we don't get to a question, we will absolutely send you an email back and outline the answer after this webinar. And we're going to hopefully do it within a very short period of time as well. So these guidelines dropped like a bomb on the industry. I don't think that a lot of people expected them. We were in communication with a lot of the GSEs and Fannie Mae prior to these guidelines being issued, specifically regarding reserve studies and how Fannie Mae was now looking at reserve studies. But we didn't even expect the depth and breadth of these guideline changes that came out. And they're incredibly impactful. They're incredibly impactful for our lender clients. They're incredibly impactful for our property management clients, and also specifically for our developer clients that we work with on a regular basis. So the focus of the guidelines we really agree with. You know, these guidelines came out of this tragic event in Surfside, Florida, of the collapse of the Champlain Tower condominium development. And you know, we talked about it when it first happened, and one of the things I kept on saying to the staff members was, you know, this is absolutely going to change the world. And I said, the reason why it's going to change the world is because there was a video of it. Had there not been a video of it, this tragic event, I don't think it would have gotten as much attention as it has, and I'm happy it has. What we've seen over the years within condominium developments has been some sort of apathy, dependent upon the development, of course, but apathy by HOA board members and property management groups in doing the necessary and needed repairs to the buildings, specifically regarding their infrastructure and structural components. And Fannie Mae has released these guidelines essentially to now require lenders to vet these developments to make sure that, you know, their infrastructure is being thought about, that there's enough capital to make the repairs and maintenance that is necessary. And the way we look at it is we're hoping that this really changes the industry in a good way. I think that this guidance being issued as temporary guidance was very interesting. From that perspective, I think that there may be some changes that come to this guidance. We've been hearing that that national lending groups have been pushing back against some of the requirements within, and really outlining to Fannie Mae that, you know, they weren't very happy with some of these guidelines. And we hope Fannie Mae takes some of that, you know, guidance, you know, some of that, you know, commentary into consideration and makes some changes here. But all in all, we think that this guidance is good and will be eventually good for the industry. So that being said, you know, what are these lender requirements, right? So lenders are now tasked with making all these determinations about project eligibility that some may have in the past, but there's a lot of additional review documentation and a lot of additional, you know, commentary that's required on these appraisal reports. And you really have to look into these condo and cooperative developments with a completely different lens than you have before. One of the things that, you know, has become really important is, you know, the special assessment review. But if you look at the special assessment guidance that came out, it's not very different from what lenders were always doing. So you have to kind of look at this as a layered review process. And the additional requirements that Fannie Mae is asking lenders to review prior to, you know, closing a loan within one of these developments, it requires kind of a comprehensive review of a lot of the documentation you've received. And I think some lenders have been doing that all along. And for some lenders, it's going to be a very new process. So where do you start? And that's really what we want to share today. We always begin where, when we looked at these guidelines, you know, there were two kind of components to them. What guidelines went into effect immediately, and what guidelines were going to go into effect on January 1st, 2022. So the first guideline that went into effect immediately on October 14th was the unavailable status within CPM. That unavailable status within CPM essentially, removes a condominium development from being able to be lent on. And for our lenders, it's one of the first steps that they now have to take. And we've watched in the industry as lenders have kind of pushed off this responsibility to a place that's very early in the process, prior to origination, essentially, giving loan officers the ability to run CPM and determine whether a project is unavailable has been something that we're starting to see in the industry, to find out as soon as possible that there's no chance for mortgage financing within a particular property, and or launching this CPM check at the point in time of post origination when the file is being processed. But it's certainly something that has to happen at the very earliest stages of a review of a loan within a lender's portfolio. So Fannie Mae requires that this lenders check that CPM to ensure that that project is eligible for financing. It's important to note here, within the first 2 weeks of these guidelines being in effect, we kept on going back to CPM to see how many sites had been added, thinking that, oh, well, we'll just, create a list and, look at the list every day or, week or month or whatever to see what's been added. And within that first 2 week period of time, there were over 930 developments that went on the unavailable list. So it's since that point in time grown to a much larger number. But it's really important to note that this is, industry-wide, and this unavailable status industry, you're going to see a lot of projects in Florida and California, if you go into CPM, have been added as unavailable. And of course, the only way to make a project available once it has this unavailable designation is to run it through the PERS process. The other giant guideline change for a lot of our lender clients who handle new construction condominium developments was the suspense of the acceptance of the reserve study. So Fannie Mae in the past had accepted a reserve study and the prescription of that reserve study in lieu of having a 10% line item for reserve in the operating budget. And what we found, even over the last month since these guidelines have come out, is that that policy, not that we agree with it necessarily, because I think that on a new construction development, a 10% line item, not only is it arbitrary, but it's often way too much to fund for a new construction development where the first component is going to fail in year 10 or 11 or 12. And we're hyper concerned about what condominium boards essentially are going to do with this extra capital that they have. And worse, we're concerned that they'll just stop funding it entirely and eliminate the 10% line item if they have essentially an abundance of cash that they're not utilizing. And that's what we've seen year over year in new construction condominium developments. So abandoning the ability to utilize a reserve study to reduce the 10% line item is really something that one of the guidelines that we don't agree with here. However, across the board, this is the policy. What's interesting about it is that every single portfolio lender that we've spoken to so far is not only utilizing the reserve study and allowing a reduction in the 10% reserve line item for new construction condominium developments, but they're also requiring it because it's one of those documents that really provides you with a clear-cut view of what the components are and what the component costs are. So this suspense of the acceptance of a reserve study on new construction development is something that we hope goes away in the future or hope gets amended. But as of right now, this guideline is in place. Of course, this dovetails into the next guideline that is impactful for the industry, which is established condo and co-op reserve study acceptance is also suspended. So in the past, you'd be able to utilize a reserve study and accept a development and pass a development for a full review with Fannie Mae if that development had a reserve study that was less than 36 months old, regardless of what the reserve contribution or prescription was. Essentially, it would be accepted as long as a reserve study was provided. That guideline is gone. Essentially, you can no longer accept a reserve study to reduce the 10% reserve line item requirement in the operating budget for any established condominium or cooperative development. The only way, of course, to get an acceptance of a development that is utilizing a reserve study is to submit it through the PERS process for Fannie Mae to review the site. Now, that's pretty interesting. I think that there are a lot of developments that are going to go down that road. We have seen over the years condominium developments with $2, $3, $10, $15 million sitting in reserve accounts for various reasons, whether they were statutorily required contributions in some states on conversion developments that were contributed in, and this huge amounts of capital existed, or whether there was some sort of construction deficiency case, and the board and association got a huge settlement that funded their reserves for years to come. We see a lot of developments that have large reserve accounts that don't want to reserve the 10%. So we think that there's going to be kind of a run on the Fannie Mae PERS submission process to get Fannie Mae to essentially allow these reserve studies for these established projects. The other major change to these guidelines is, of course, the outline on special assessments. So going back to the original point that I made at the beginning of this presentation, the concern here for Fannie Mae and for the rest of the industry, frankly, is making sure that condominium developments have enough capital and cash and are thinking forward enough to ensure that they have enough capital to make the necessary repairs to the structure, to the large mechanical components within the development, to ensure that habitability of these condominium units within these developments kind of doesn't change at all, right? You don't want to shut down half a building. You want to have enough capital to make these types of repairs. And what's frowned upon, and frankly has always been frowned upon, is the special assessment. The thought process has always been from a perspective of compliance and ensuring that a development is financially and fiscally responsible for these developments to be able to have enough capital and thought about capital prior to the actual requirement to having it. So as an example, you don't want to create a special assessment in order to fix the HVAC system. That could be considered a deferred maintenance item. Now, the problem that we have right now in the industry is that special assessments have always been utilized, or I should say, have been utilized by certain condominium developments and HOAs as a method of collecting, this capital when a necessary repair needed to be done. And some developments and owners within those developments have the financial means to pay for those special assessments. And that is the way that it's, always been done for the life of their development. If there was a large repair, they would create a special assessment, and that special assessment essentially would fund that repair. Right now, if you're looking at a global view of a development, you really have to make a really hard determination as a lender as to whether that special assessment is for a large mechanical component that could create a habitability problem for the homeowners within the development. But I'll give you another great example, and I think that's what this webinar is really all about. Excuse me. I live in New York. we do, there are an enormous amount of condominium developments here in New York. In New York City, it's common if an HVAC system or the air conditioning in a specific building isn't functioning up to par in the summer, for that component to be serviced in the winter. So, as that relates to special assessments, sometimes that component is repaired or replaced within the winter, and sometimes there's a special assessment for it. So should that render a condominium development ineligible for financing? And the answer is no. I mean, we really have to kind of look at these things and look at these individual component repairs and gather enough information to make the right decisions about these developments, to not only make ourselves comfortable as lenders and reviewers of these projects, but also the GSEs. The additional guidelines that have also been issued are specifically for appraisers. Now, there is a requirement here for an appraiser to outline their opinion on whether or not there's a structural or mechanical issue within the development, or if there's any issue that they've determined by their on-site inspection of the property that could impact the safety, the soundness, the structural integrity, or habitability of that project. What we've seen in the industry is the beginning of a little bit of pushback from a large appraisal management firms and from appraisers themselves, because in many instances, appraisers don't have what they think is the necessary training to make these types of judgment calls. And it's very hard for appraisers to do this. However, that being said, if they want to be in the game, Fannie Mae has very specific guidelines about this and what an appraiser now has to add into their appraisals in order to determine the viability or lending viability of a condominium or cooperative development. So, within the scope of that, I have to tell you, I think that this is one of those guidelines that's going to remain, but it's one of the requirements for lenders to kind of look at these appraisal reports with a different lens, as I said earlier, and ensure that appraisers are commenting on the structural viability, infrastructure, mechanical components to the best of their ability within these reports, because as a lender, you're going to be utilizing that appraisal to make your judgment on the condominium development's compliance. The other massive issue that has changed, or massive guideline change that has happened here, has been this PEW waiver suspension. So I have to tell you, I've been in this industry a long time. I've worked with large national lenders. I've worked with small lenders, mid-sized lenders. And on the large national lender side, I mean, there are whole departments that essentially submit for PEWs to Fannie Mae on a regular basis. The PEW is no longer an acceptable vehicle for lenders to determine eligibility, and will not be issued, Fannie Mae clearly states, for deferred maintenance issues, certificates of occupancy, regulatory inspections, projects with large special assessments, and insurance policy deficiencies. Boy, is this a giant punch in the gut. A lot of lenders utilize the PEW waiver process, and at whatever fee it was, I think it was $250, to ensure that that development, to essentially wear a belt and suspenders internally and say, okay, this is how one underwriter feels about a project. This is how another underwriter feels about a project. Let's send it in for a PEW and see how Fannie Mae feels. Well, that's no longer a possibility. Again, everybody still has the option of submitting a project into Fannie Mae for a PERS submission at a cost, of course, but this PEW waiver suspension is giant for the industry, and it's a big part of these guideline changes. So the crux of these guidelines is really around significant deferred maintenance and the infrastructure, right? When we looked at these guidelines initially, and to be fair, to outline this correctly, I do have a lot of experience and expertise in project components and their lifespan, and their remaining useful life, and what is deferred maintenance and what isn't deferred maintenance. It is really hard to make these determinations on what a deferred maintenance issue is within a development. We looked at these guidelines backwards and forwards, and Fannie's guidelines, and I outlined it here, and again, this presentation will be available, but it's clearly in the guidelines as well. Loans secured by units in condo and co projects with significant deferred maintenance, or in projects that have received a directive from a regulatory authority or inspection agency to make repairs due to unsafe conditions, are not eligible for purchase. These projects will remain ineligible until all the required repairs have been made and documented. So look, regulatory agency and/or violation issues, I totally get. If there's a violation on a property that is tied to a habitability issue, a safety issue, you really don't want to lend in that site. And if I'm Fannie Mae, I really don't want to insure a loan in that site. As a lender, I don't want to lend in that site until the problem is corrected. But there's a fine line between what's really deferred maintenance and what's something that is really just on this right schedule to be repaired and maintained. And clearly, Fannie Mae states that these policies don't apply to routine maintenance or repairs. And I think the spirit of these guidelines is to really ensure that or this specific guideline is to really ensure that we're not making the wrong lending decisions here in projects that really just haven't been thoughtful about repairs and maintenance. But one of the only ways to determine that is really to obtain an engineering report, a reserve study. So from our perspective, we're looking at this saying, well, wouldn't it be nice to have a reserve study on every single site so we can actually determine whether or not something is deferred maintenance or not, and whether or not the board has been thoughtful about setting aside reserves for that specific component. But again, the removal of the ability to utilize a reserve study, which would have been a perfect document for review, kind of eliminates your ability to do that. I shouldn't say it that way. I think that reserve studies are probably something that are going to be continued to be requested, and for condominium developers that are going to continue to get reserve studies, because they do more than reduce a 10% line item for a reserve, or they really provide an accurate analysis of what the remaining useful life is of these components, and being able to create a schedule of repairs and maintenance within the development that makes sense. So we're going to see where this lands. I think going forward, maybe one of the ways to have a lender ensure that a project is not suffering from significant deferred maintenance is to request a reserve study. I know that we at CondoTek are requesting reserve studies whenever they are available within our process of document collection through our Condo Pack product, or within our condo project warrant product, where we're warranting these sites for our lender clients now. We're requesting the reserve study because we want to make this determination. If one exists, we want to see if there's something that is, some component that that is significantly, that if the development suffers from some sort of significant deferred maintenance. And I got a question prior to this event, for asking, what the definition of, significant deferred maintenance is. And I really think it is, it's kind of one of those things you look up and go, oh, let me give the right answer here, and let me make sure that I have this, the Webster Dictionary definition. But I think Fannie Mae puts it pretty succinctly. Anything that isn't routine maintenance or repairs that OHOA undertakes to maintain or preserve the integrity and condition of the property. I think that definition leaves a lot for interpretation, but I think it's the best one that we have. So, best practices. And we're going to spend some time here. I wanted to make sure we had left enough time in this presentation for questions, should any questions come up. The best practice section of these guidelines is very interesting, because it's not really a guideline. It's kind of like a guideline within a guideline, right? Is it required? Is it not required? Is it something that Fannie Mae thinks we should do? Yes. But is it required in every single instance? Doesn't seem to be. Again, going back to the original goal and spirit of these guidelines, and I can't say it enough. This is a response to these tragic events, or the tragic event that happened in Florida. And the best practices section kind of takes that into account, right? It says, let's find as much information as we can about a development to make sure that we're lending in developments where this won't happen again. And that question that has come up and, kind of routinely comes up nowadays is something that we're all struggling with. But if we follow these guidelines and some of these best practices, I think we're all going to get there. So one of the things that's come up, and every single lender has asked us a question about this at CondoTek, which is, as a best practice, the lender should review the past 6 months of a project's HOA meeting minutes and obtain information about any maintenance or construction that may have significant safety or soundness, structural integrity, or habitability impacts on the unit or the project. We looked at that, and, again, another gut punch. If you've worked in this industry even for a short period of time, you'll realize how difficult it is to obtain HOA meeting minutes. Not only how difficult it is, but there are many HOAs, condominium developments, cooperative developments, that don't meet regularly. There are some HOAs that don't keep meeting minutes. There are several industry responses to this from large property management groups outlining that they, because of legal reasons and possible litigation, will not release HOA meeting minutes. At CondoTek, we looked at this, and as an organization, immediately within our CondoPack product, outlined that we can't provide it. It's not something that's retrievable on a regular basis. So I will make the comment this way. I think that questionnaires have to change. I think that additional questions have to be added to questionnaires. I think to some extent, pressure has to be exerted, and it will normally be exerted by the fact that everybody's going to start asking these for these documents and or the questionnaires to be answered appropriately. I think within the questionnaires, property management groups have to do a deep dive into each one of their developments and make a decision as to what they're going to report, and essentially report everything they possibly can to limit their own liability, but also to provide the appropriate information for lenders to make the right decision about lending in that particular site. So I think meeting minutes is kind of the tip of the iceberg. I don't think a lot of meeting minutes are going to be provided. I mean, we just saw a development that we were working on for an HOA that was submitted for a PERS approval, and we got a conditional approval back last week, and the conditional approval clearly stated that they wanted 6 months worth of meeting minutes. Well, that was a new one. The guideline technically hasn't really gone into effect yet until January 1st, but we got it as a condition on a PERS approval. In addition to that, they requested that the development provide a reserve study to outline, whether or not there was a structural deficiency or whether there was some sort of problem with the infrastructure or deferred maintenance. So again, I think when people first saw these guidelines, they were like, well, there's no reserve studies anymore in the industry. And then the first PERS approval that we get back from Fannie Mae, or a conditional PERS approval, has a condition for a reserve study. Again, going back to that point, I think that many developments are going to now seek to obtain a reserve study, and many property managers are going to push their boards to obtain a reserve study, frankly, so that they don't have to answer the questions and a professional will. As far as the meeting minutes are concerned, because I don't want to kind of go too far out of these guidelines or kind of go too far into the stories that I usually tell within these presentations. I think within the meeting minutes section of this, I think there are a lot of developments that just really aren't going to be able to get them. And it's not something that a lot of lenders are going to see and be able to utilize to make a decision. I joke that if you ever looked at meeting minutes that were written by a board member, typically somebody sitting in a corner, right, trying to describe everything that's being said, you wouldn't be able to determine what they say. I mean, it's really hard. I've sat in some of those rooms. I've sat in many of those board meetings actually, and watched them try to transcribe what somebody was kind of scribing in a corner. It just doesn't work. So I think the industry is going to have to find a way around the meeting minute issue. And I don't think a lot of lenders are going to be able to even get the meeting minutes on these developments. However, the second piece of this is, our recommendation, or Fannie Mae's recommendation in this case. Our recommendations are going to come in a minute or two. But Fannie Mae recommends here that lenders review any available inspection, engineering, or other certification reports completed within the past 5 years to identify any deferred maintenance, as I addressed earlier, right? Of course, that includes material litigation that might be reported on a project, but that, I think, is our best bet. I think in many instances, as a group of lenders or reviewers that are on this call, and originators that are on this call, and property managers, there's a big swath of people that have joined this today. I think we're going to have to really look at these inspection reports and engineering reports, reserve studies, any other report that exists out there in the industry to try and make some sort of determination if a red flag is raised from the questionnaire. I think, and we'll outline a little bit later again, what we think should be a lender's best practice in the review process. But, I think, by and large, you're going to need to ask for, in certain circumstances, a lot of this additional documentation to make the right decisions in some of these developments. Frankly, I don't think you can rely on Fannie Mae's unavailable status in development. Of course you can't, because you're warranting these sites, but especially when there is no unavailable status listed. But you're going to have to ask for a lot more. And at our firm, we're already asking for a lot more. So the last piece of Fannie Mae's best practice is, of course, if you've read through these guidelines, is an outline that, reminding lenders that the appraisers must document any special assessments, deferred maintenance, or anything that's going to impact the safety, soundness, or structural integrity of these projects. Again, going back to this point, because it's so important, a lender's responsibility of appraisal review and an underwriter's responsibility and the training that they're going to now need to be, kind of involved in order to review these types of, commentary, I think, going forward, and I'm thinking long-term here, somebody with a very keen eye is going to have to review these appraisals and make sure that there's no commentary within them that speaks to any of these issues. I'm going to give you a little guidance in a minute about what we think is important for a reviewer to do, and the 6 or 7 most important points that we've pulled out of this guidance so far. So let me move this down the line a little bit. So a little bit here on CondoTek, because the way we looked at the industry based upon these guidelines that were issued, and with the acquisition of National Condo Advisors, we now have the ability here to provide not only our CondoTek service, which a lot of lenders utilize across the country, hundreds of lenders utilize across the country in order to obtain the appropriate condominium documents for review. But we also launched the product called the Condo Project Warrant, and we also launched a product called the Co-op Pack. So the Condo Project Warrant is really interesting because we essentially now warrant the entire project based upon the individual loan. That's, and we warrant the individual loan for repurchase, by the way, but we warrant the project and that loan for compliance with Fannie Mae's guidelines, or frankly, any GSE's guidelines. We even warrant projects to individual portfolio lending guidelines, should we have those guidelines, or should a lender provide that to us. it was kind of timely right now in the industry because a lot of lenders don't want the responsibility, and a lot of mid-sized and small lenders don't have the ability or capability to review a lot of condominium developments and don't have the staff to do it. So we thought it was important to introduce a product that essentially allowed somebody else to take on that job and take on that responsibility and to insure around it. So this product insures for any repurchase, meaning that if that loan is repurchased based upon the warrantability of the project, then essentially we take full responsibility for that project and we will repurchase that loan. So that being said, we're trying to give an ability to lenders to do business quickly, to close loans within these developments quickly, and to really do it safely, and ensure that they won't continue to have ongoing risk in a decision that they made about a specific condominium development based upon these new guidelines or any other guidelines within any other GSE guidelines for condominium or cooperative lending. We've also introduced the co-op pack. The co-op pack is interesting right now because for lenders who do cooperative loans, you would know that it is really hard to get co-op documents, and we provide co-op documents very quickly here at CondoTek, at CondoTek through our CondoPack product, but now the co-op pack product is also something that's issued into the industry, so we'll provide those on co-ops as well. And it should be said that our condo project warrant is currently in beta and released with several lenders. It launches live in January to all lenders. And it also should be said that we're also releasing a co-op project warrant coming shortly, where we'll also warrant cooperative project developments within that product line. We do that on a regular basis now, normally, but not bundled together with the document retrieval. So we thought that was important for you to note, or it was an important thing for me to mention here today. The other piece of this that we thought was important to outline to you is what our recommendations were. We provide, thousands of condominium document reviews every single year across the entire country, the entire United States. And because of that, our review team and the technology that we've kind of injected into that process of document collection and review allows us to kind of hone in on what the real issues are here within these guidelines. Of course, our experience in providing these reviews for decades also helps, but the combination of both kind of has allowed us to come up with some sort of outline for you, an outline for lenders to really make smart determinations here about condominium cooperative projects. So first of all, determining the eligibility at loan origination and prior to closing by checking the availability of the project for lending, we think is an important thing for a lender to do. Granted, it's wearing a belt and suspenders of checking, the CPM, system twice. But I kind of like wearing a belt and suspenders, when it comes to, matters of compliance and repurchase. So checking that eligibility, and we think, a lot of developments are going to end up on this unavailable list, we think is a really important part of the process. And it should be really, across your entire teams at lending organizations, for everybody to be aware of it, and maybe for originators to, check that before they even bring a loan in-house. The second, of course, is review all appropriate documentation, including that, questionnaire with the appropriate new questions on it. We're happy to give you what we think are the right questions to ask. We have adapted several new questions into our internal questionnaire that we're getting answered for our condo project warrant process and our condo pack process as well. But you really, as a lender, not only want to review that questionnaire very thoroughly to see if there are any red flags, but also the appraisal, the budget. Now you already have the title, there already is a violation search. you have to determine that lending risk by utilizing every single piece of paper that you have, at your fingertips. Now, in the past, maybe some of this stuff wouldn't be reviewed as closely as it now needs to be. But and it may have been reviewed at different points along the process. But as early as you could get a title report in, get it. Work with your title providers or push for that title as early as possible, just to ensure that you can look into it and see if there are any major issues on that development, any violations there, before you spend all the time and effort in underwriting the rest of the package. The appraisal, the budget, are normal things for us to look at. But again, the appraisal is going to have additional information on it based upon the appraiser's view of the development and its infrastructure and structural viability, so to speak. So that needs to be kind of drilled down on, and any other red flags you may see, to ensure that you're not repurchasing any of these loans. The third thing that we saw that was really important, and at some lenders we've seen that this is really just not done well, and some lenders we see out there that do this incredibly well, which is aligning your sales, your processing, and your underwriting teams in Fannie Mae policy, and establishing that consistency all across the board, right? If you have two underwriters underwriting a condominium or cooperative project, they should come up with the same answer at the end of the day based upon the guidelines that they need to underwrite to. And those are, of course, these new guidelines. And it's really incredibly important because, closing a loan, with a major structural issue is not only a problem for you as the lender, but it may be a problem for the individuals that you're lending to in the future. God forbid another tragedy like this happens. Freddie Mac. Look, Freddie Mac has, a little bit of different guidelines, especially for reserves on new construction condominium developments in certain municipalities. There are, like as an example, in New York, there is a working capital contribution that's contributed by purchasers at closing. Freddie Mac allows you to utilize that capital, that working capital contribution, as a reserve contribution, or in order to, not require the 10% line item requirement. Look out for those future published guidelines. We think that they're coming out soon. We have no knowledge of when they're coming out. We're hoping they come out soon. We've heard, whispers in the industry of when they're coming out, and that something will be, provided by Freddie Mac in the near future. And we're really looking to see what they come out with. There are possibly different opinions that will come from Freddie Mac, and Freddie Mac may align very closely with these new Fannie Mae guidelines. We're not really sure. We're also looking at secondary market investor policies as they relate to these new guidelines. And you should know that, there's no right answer right now. Across the board, we're seeing investors align with these policies exactly, requiring a 10% reserve line item, requiring these additional appraisal requirements, and we're seeing some portfolio lenders or investors who are not, who are, specifically in the portfolio condo lending space. We're seeing a lot of portfolio lenders that are kind of railing against this to some extent, especially on the reserve side for new construction development, but also for reserve studies on existing established developments that don't have or don't want to put a 10% line item in. So be very thoughtful in the future as these guidelines come out. We, of course, will be providing additional seminars and additional webinars to the industry on these new guidelines. So look out on our blog for these updates as well. Number 5, utilization of reserve studies to kind of, get some sort of idea on what the structural component costs are, whether or not some of these, some of the infrastructure and or deferred maintenance in these developments is really deferred maintenance, what the infrastructure looks like, what the components look like, what the last repair date on some of these mechanical components was. It's really hard to find that in any other study, including a normal engineering study. or even a property condition assessment. But there are pieces of each of those reports that are kind of important. So a property condition assessment essentially won't really go into the financial wherewithal of a condominium or cooperative development, where a reserve study does. But a PCA really does provide an intensive review of the components. So, whatever's available, we want you to look for. We want you to find. We want you to ask for. Look for amended condo and co-op questionnaires in the industry as well. We know we've started to see some of these large organizations that provide some of these questionnaires, changing some of the questionnaire questions. What we're looking for is for our lenders to really amend their internal condo and co-op questionnaires to align with these agency guidelines, and really include, if you can, specific attestation language for the HOAs and property managers about the condition of their properties. They know, they live there. We want to make sure that somebody is, outlining what the problems with the building are, if there are any. And then the final point to make here is that, and it's one I didn't put on the list, but it's probably something that's really important for you. Every lender has to realize now that the PERS approval doesn't any longer, relinquish a lender's responsibility of review. It's one of the other things that I've talked about with several lenders out there, where in the past, the PERS approval was, the blanket approval, which would allow a lender to close a loan in a specific project. But it really doesn't seem like that's the case anymore, because a lender still has to, even on PERS approved projects, go in and make a determination regarding deferred maintenance infrastructure and the like. It's the way the guidelines are written. So we're very concerned about that, because that PERS approval, which used to absolve a lender from a lot of the review responsibility, isn't what it used to be. And that's something that's important to note here. So, of course, you can contact myself or Lisa. There was a technical issue on this presentation where we weren't able to hear Lisa or Lisa's commentary here. I would love to hear from you. And let's take a quick look and see if there are any questions that could come up or did come up within this presentation. And if not, if we did such a good job, we might not need to answer any. So let me just pop in through a couple of these here. Actually, there are a bunch of questions here. One of the questions is, will CondoTek be obtaining the additional confirmations required by Fannie Mae when completing the condo PAC order? In many cases, yes. We will not be obtaining the meeting minutes, but the additional requirements as listed for determining whether or not a project has any issues or has had any structural deficiency or problems with the infrastructure, we are asking within our new questionnaire questions. Another question here, in setting up the budget for a new construction co-op, is there anything beyond having the 10% of the budget or reserves, any study required? So in a new construction co-op, you can add a 10% line item in for reserves. Typically the way the guidance used to, be given by Fannie Mae and is in their seller servicer guide, says you needed adequate reserves, but you may need a reserve study and or a property condition assessment, even on a new construction development, to determine what the components are. Is it necessary? No. Are a lot of lenders going to ask, or portfolio lenders continue to ask for it? Yes. And it really depends on what the price point is of that specific cooperative development, which would lead you into determining whether you want to comply with Fannie Mae's guidelines in whole, in part, or if that particular cooperative development, depending upon its price point, wouldn't really be required to comply with Fannie Mae's guidelines because all of the loans are being done from portfolio lenders. So we'll see, going forward how this all kind of plays out. But and another question here, just to round this out, do we know if Fannie Mae will be updating the 1076 and 1077 questionnaire forms to collect additional info about special assessments and deferred maintenance from the HOAs? Gosh, I'm hoping they do. I've been involved in several industry calls. I've been involved in several industry outlines of, what these guidelines mean to the industry. I hope that Fannie Mae provides additional guidance here. I'm really looking forward to what Freddie Mac has to say about this, if they have something to say about this, should they have something to say about this, which I think they do, or what Freddie Mac is going to say about, or what they're going to add to their own guidelines in response to this condominium collapse. Just so you're aware, industry-wide, everybody, I think, is going to respond. I think we're going to see some sort of response from HUD, from the VA, from every GSE, from every portfolio lender and or investor in one way, shape, or form or another. We kind of, look, it wasn't that hard to call this after the collapse. As soon as the collapse happened, we had a meeting here and really looked into this and said, this is going to change the world. And to some extent it has. And I think it'll change the lending world for this type of product going forward. So happy to answer any additional questions. You can contact myself or Lisa GELOSO. We're happy to provide any guidance we can. Happy to provide you information about any of our products here at CondoTek. And please look at our website at CondoTek.com for updates on our blog. This presentation will be presented on and will be uploaded to that blog. The PowerPoint will be uploaded to that blog, so if you need to refer back to it, you can. Additional PowerPoints are being created, and additional seminars, I should say, are being created specifically for property managers and how property managers should deal with these guidelines, as well as for condominium attorneys who create condominium bylaws and budgets. They're a major client of ours, and we do an enormous amount of work with these types of developments, with these types of attorneys who call us on a regular basis for advice and guidance on this, and a very in-depth seminar and webinar for HOAs. We think that there's not enough information for board members out there regarding these new guidelines. I'm on several calls a day with existing established condominium associations discussing these new guidelines and discussing how to get their buildings compliant. And I guess you wouldn't be surprised to know that a lot of them have no idea. So with that being said, I can't thank you enough for the time. I apologize for the technical difficulties because I would have loved to have Lisa join in a little bit here. And hopefully on the next presentation, she'll be able to. And we really appreciate not only your business for the clients that we have here on this webinar, but we appreciate working with you within the industry and appreciate our relationship with you. So thank you very much. And on to the next one. Please check our blog for more information. Thank you.